Today, we're not really talking about religion. We're talking about logic. We're diving into one of the oldest and, honestly, one of the most rigorous systems of analytical thought in the world, the Talmud. And we're going to do it by exploring these fascinating legal puzzles surrounding the Jewish Sabbath, or Shabbat. It is an absolute masterclass in how to think. So let's jump in and see how this ancient way of thinking can teach us a new way to see the world.
To get started, just imagine something for me. What if Saturday wasn't just another day on the calendar, but a unique conceptual space? You know, like a dimension with its own rules of physics, its own legal jurisdictions, where the simple act of moving an object from one place to another becomes this profound philosophical question. Well, that's exactly how Talmudic law looks at Shabbat.
Okay, so to really get our heads around the incredible puzzles we're about to explore, we first need to understand the basic physics of this unique space. It all boils down to two fundamental actions, a kind of lifting and placing, and the four distinct territories where these actions can happen.
And what's so fascinating here is just how precise this is. The first action is akira, which means lifting an object or literally uprooting it from where it's resting. The second is hanachah, the act of setting that object down, bringing it back to a state of rest. So a single, complete act of forbidden carrying on Shabbat isn't just moving something. It needs both of these distinct moments, a crystal clear beginning and a definite end.
And these actions take place across four different domains. First, you've got the private domain. Just think of your house. Next, the public domain, like a busy street. Then there's this interesting one, the carmulet, which is kind of a semi-public space, like a field. And finally, a little exempt area. The classic prohibition is carrying an object from a private domain into a public one. Okay, now that we have this basic framework, let's see what happens when these rules get seriously stress-tested in our first great puzzle. So, let's take those principles and apply them to our first case, the case of the floating walnut. It sounds a little strange, I know, but it is a brilliant thought experiment. It's designed to push our simple definitions of lifting and placing to their absolute breaking point. And here's the core question. If you lift a walnut that's just floating on the surface of some water, have you actually performed an act of akira? Have you uprooted it from a true state of rest? The answer seems pretty obvious at first, but it completely cracks open a deep disagreement about what rest even means.
And here's the heart of the conflict. Do we focus on the object itself? From that point of view, the walnut is perfectly still, it's at rest. Or do we focus on its foundation? The water, even if it looks totally calm, is always subtly moving, and that means the walnut's foundation is fundamentally unstable. So, is it at rest or is it in motion?
The Talmud's initial verdict is crystal clear. A walnut on water is not considered to be at rest. Because its foundation is unstable, lifting it isn't a true act of uprooting. The object was already conceptually in motion. But as you can probably guess, with all great puzzles, this is just the beginning.
And this is the legendary question posed by the sage Rava, and people have been debating it for centuries. Now the walnut is on a stable foundation, the bowl. But the bowl's foundation, the water, is unstable. This one tiny change makes the problem exponentially more complicated. The Talmud itself leaves this question unanswered. It's what's called a taiku, an unresolved paradox. And that word, taiku, is traditionally said to be an acronym for a Hebrew phrase meaning the prophet Elijah will one day return and solve all these unanswerable questions. How cool is that?
And this is where we see the real takeaway. Later thinkers tried to solve it, and their arguments show that the debate was never really about the walnut. It's a clash of worldviews about what stability even is. For the thinker Ramban, it's all about absolute physical stability. If the water is moving, nothing on it is truly at rest. Simple as that. For the school of Tosafot, it's about human convention. Is a floating bowl a normal place to store things? If not, it's not a proper resting place. And for Rambam, it's about a connection to the ultimate foundation, the earth itself. The water disconnects the object from the ground, so it just can't be truly at rest.
Our next puzzle shifts focus a bit, moving from the physics of an object to the complexities of legal jurisdiction. If the floating walnut was all about what it means to be at rest, the outstretched hand is about where a person is.
Okay, here's the scenario. You're standing inside your house, that's the private domain. You stick your hand out the window into the street, the public domain. So what jurisdiction is your hand in? Is it an extension of your private property, since, it's attached to your body? Or is it now subject to the laws of the public space it's physically sitting in?
Now what's just fascinating here is a tiny detail that changes everything. Two of the most authoritative ancient manuscripts of the Talmud have a different word right at this key moment. One version proves its point using the example of a poor person's hand reaching in to beg. The other uses the homeowner's hand reaching out.
Now, both versions get to the exact same conclusion, but they are forced to use completely different logical pathways to get there. It just goes to show you, in this system, every single word carries an immense amount of weight.
So, what's the verdict?
Well, the hand doesn't just become public or private. Instead, this clash of jurisdictions creates a new hybrid zone. The hand itself becomes a carmelit, that third, in-between space we talked about earlier, and it's governed by its own unique rules. The key takeaway is that when two domains conflict, the result isn't that one just wins. The system can actually create a third, compromise space, a concept that has some incredible parallels in modern international law.
All right, for our final case, let's move from floating walnuts and phantom jurisdictions to something a bit more down to earth, a simmering stew. This puzzle is a great example of how these highly abstract principles have very real-world practical applications right in the kitchen.
So here's the problem. Before Shabbat begins, you put a stew on a low flame to keep it warm for your meal on Saturday. Now, cooking is forbidden, but the real issue here is the temptation to improve the food. You might see the coals are getting a little low and be tempted to stoke them to make your stew cook a little faster or taste just a little bit better. That act of improving is a form of creative labor, and that's what's forbidden. So the question becomes, at what point is the food cooked enough that you wouldn't be tempted to mess with it anymore?
To answer that, the law develops this incredibly precise spectrum of cookedness. It's not just a simple raw versus cooked. Oh no, there's a stage where it becomes machol ben drusai, which basically means minimally edible. Then there's fully cooked, but it gets even more specific. There's food that is mitztamek v'yafelo. It actually improves the longer it simmers. And then there's food that is mitztamek viralo. It's ruined by more simmering. So this entire debate hinges on human psychology. When are you no longer tempted to interfere? The strict view, from Rambam, says the stew must be fully cooked and be the type of dish that's actually ruined by more heat. That's the only way to be absolutely sure you won't touch it. The more lenient view argues that once it's basically edible, you've lost interest, even if more heat would make it better. And then a middle view tries to split the difference. See? The question isn't just about the food, it's about the person cooking it.
So after floating walnuts, jurisdictional hands, and simmering stews, what's the bigger picture? What is the deeper meaning behind these strange and frankly absolutely wonderful puzzles?
You might think that these extreme cases, a walnut in a bowl floating on water, are just silly distractions, that they're irrelevant edge cases. But if you think that, you're missing the entire point of the exercise. They are precision tools. They're stress tests for ideas. By pushing a simple concept like at rest to its most illogical conclusion, these thinkers force themselves to define what they really mean by stability, by jurisdiction, and by human intention. The extreme hypothetical isn't the subject, it's the scalpel used to dissect the core principle that's hiding underneath.
And this leaves us with a final thought. What are the simple, everyday rules in your own life, the routines you follow, the beliefs you hold, that are actually built on a hidden, complex, and totally fascinating logic you've just never stopped to examine? Thanks for joining me on this journey into the world of Talmudic thought. I hope it inspires you to look for the hidden logic that's all around you.